Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Pam Thomas, and with me here now are Lana Brooks and Emily Sims from the Early Learning section at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I'll be your facilitator for today. We appreciate you spending time with us. Today's topic is the Regional Hub Model, and we hope to provide you with some helpful information. Before we get into today's presentation, I just want to give a quick look at the stakeholders represented in the audience for today's webinar. The largest group of stakeholders is from our local communities, either local programs, providers, or nonprofit agencies. Then public entities make up the second largest group, with school districts, state agencies, and universities each having a similar size of stakeholders. And last but not least, there are again somewhat similar size of parents, Head Start community action agencies, health departments, hospitals, and advocates represented in the group of stakeholders here today. Just a quick rundown of the agenda. First, we'll provide a few webinar logistics. Then we'll start with a brief overview of the Preschool Development Grant. Emily's going to join us to explain the Regional Hub activities, and Lana will jump in on what's currently happening. I'll finish up the presentation portion of the webinar with some information about Hub Readiness activities, and then we'll move into questions and answers and try to give you some answers to some of your questions here live. To wrap up, we'll provide a few next steps and some contact information. So quick start now with just a few webinar logistics. We are conducting the webinar using a live stream function today. That is a view-only platform. So to make a comment or ask a question, just drop us an email at the website here, at the email address here, earlylearning@desi.mo.gov, and we'll answer your questions at the end of today's presentation. We are recording today's event, and we'll send a copy of the slide deck you see here, as well as a recording to our stakeholders. If you're not signed up to receive these stakeholder messages, please again drop us an email and ask to be added to our preschool grant listing to receive future messages. Okay, so we wanted to begin the presentation today with the end in mind. As you know, the state of Missouri received a 3-year preschool development grant. The vision for this work is to strengthen the infrastructure of Missouri's early childhood system. In the end, we'll have a coordinated system that is designed to meet the needs of families first and foremost. We want a coordinated system that's responsive to families and makes it easier to navigate and access, thus creating a smooth transition between early childhood and entry into kindergarten. If we're going to achieve an aligned and responsive system for families, we must work together at the state, regional, and local levels. This involves each program serving young children and families to really think about the activities we're conducting. What can be streamlined? What can we identify that works best? How can we find ways to reduce what's not working? In the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, this requires the involvement of school districts, parents as teachers, First Steps, and preschool programs all working together. And alongside early Head Start and Head Start centers, accessing the Department of Mental Health's initiatives for infant mental health, and the Departments of Social Services and Health and Senior Services with child care and home visiting programs. So the big goal for this work is school readiness, ensuring we can provide every child with access to quality programs. And prior to entering kindergarten, we know some children in Missouri don't have access to quality programs, and this really creates a range of experiences that children have before kindergarten, resulting in children having varied foundational skills and behaviors that are appropriate for the school setting. So in the current system, we know there's a lack of coordination in early childhood structures, approaches, and our policies. We know it's fragmented, and it makes it difficult for programs in elementary schools to facilitate a smooth transition. And we can do better in Missouri. So implementing a coordinated and aligned early childhood system is going to ensure increased family engagement, safe learning environments, healthy children, and ultimately stronger communities, which is what we all want. So we have to move beyond ownership in our own programs. It's not about ownership. It's about partnership with one another. And that's what's going to set the stage for our conversations today. So in the end, we want every child to be ready for kindergarten, and that really is our big goal for Missouri. So in saying that, I'm now going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to talk a little more about our topic today, which is the Regional Hub activities. Emily?
Thanks, Pam. This is a concept map of activities provided in community programs throughout the state. Activities include building relationships with families and community partners, delivering resource information to meet the needs of the family, providing information on child development, offering developmental screenings to children, attending advisory council meetings to the early care and education system, and offering professional development opportunities. Every program is completing at least one of these activities, with multiple programs completing the same activity. So you should see some familiar things here. Currently, though, we are not working together. So how do we coordinate and align our administrative activities so we are more effective and efficient in serving families? Regional hubs. A regional hub is a coordinating support system for families with children birth to age 5, serving a designated area in Missouri. Each hub is centered around the early care and education services and resources that currently exist in a community. These services and resources are offered through multiple community programs across all sectors of an early care and education system, including parent education, home visiting, prevention services, social services, child care, preschool, K-12 districts, etc. Regional hubs will promote partnership and coordination of programs through a systems approach to meet the strengths and needs of every family in a community. Through coordinated enrollment and shared resources, these hubs will support communities, schools, families, and children towards shared purpose of school readiness. In a regional hub model, we make it easier for families to find our programs and ensure we connect the family with the program that best fits their needs. Regional hubs are family-focused. It's about finding what works for families. Regional hubs are designed to coordinate existing services for young children in a more direct, effective, and family-centered way. But regional hubs are not direct service providers themselves. The hub serves as a centralized location for community programs to form partnerships with all sectors of an early care and education system and focus their efforts, strategies, and resources toward the shared purpose of preparing children for kindergarten. Community partners include public and private entities, families, home visitors, child care providers, early interventionists, resource specialists, community health centers, health departments, and nonprofit centers. One goal of the hub is to align administrative activities to increase families' access to and participation in birth to 5 programs. Administrative activities will include a coordinated enrollment for community programs in the early care and education system via an online portal, providing access to a statewide phone number and website for resources and information, and a single regional administrative office to support families. Another goal of the hub is to coordinate outreach activities to increase community support for the early care and education system. Outreach activities include maintaining an up-to-date listing of resources in the region, establishing a single early childhood advisory council within the region, and distributing universal surveys to gather and summarize feedback from families and measure child outcomes. Through these goals and coordinated system, regional hubs will be a place for every family to access resources and services that promote safe and healthy learning environments for young children. We recognize some important facts in all communities throughout the state. There are families with young children in the community who are not connected to the needed services and supports in the early care and education system. There's a group of professionals who are engaged in early childhood initiatives and meet regularly to discuss aligning efforts and improving outcomes for children and families. And there are community leaders who are ready and willing to take action with coordinating the services and supports for families with young children in an effort to improve school readiness. You are an important partner in meeting the needs of families in your community and ensuring every family has the knowledge and resources to make informed decisions about the safety, health, and education of their children. I'm now going to turn it over to Lana to talk more about the location of the regional hubs.
Thank you, Emily. What you are seeing on the screen is our proposed map of the hub areas. In the initial efforts to map out the hub areas, we reviewed approximately 17 different state agency maps and other organizations serving early care and education services in the state. What we quickly learned as we were looking through the maps is that the maps don't align. We were looking at large areas of the state where families had limited access to services and resources. So truly looking at the gaps that were created as we look at our funding streams for the various programs. So we backed up and took another look at the mapping activity from a family's perspective. Where would families go to access services and resources around early care and education? Based on this information, we created this map of proposed hub areas. One important piece of information that I want you to consider as you're looking at the hub areas is to consider that the hub area defines the activities and the coordination of the early care and education services, but doesn't necessarily limit a family's access to services. So families won't actually see the boundaries themselves. It's just the partner groups that will be coordinating the services that will recognize the boundaries. So we understand as key partners in the state begin to look at the hub concept in these areas that we probably will be making some adjustments to some of the boundaries, and that's just something that we expect as we move forward. Next, I would like to talk briefly about the pilot areas and our efforts to put in place a support for the work that's happening. So this is the southeast region of the state. This is the area of the state that in our original application with our preschool development grant, we proposed piloting some of our efforts in the very beginning. And so as you look at those particular areas, one thing that came up very quickly is how do we establish some consistency among our hub activities and making sure that we are truly getting to the depth of partnerships needed to make this project successful. So we partnered with the Dexter School District, and the Dexter School District is actually providing some work on the ground in these areas to work with some of our partners that have kind of stepped up to the plate and identified themselves as leads in those particular areas. And so we're working really hard to help them establish new partnerships, identify any barriers that might exist within their communities, and really develop some of those processes. The goal for our Dexter contract is really to think about the consistency and developing some of those first steps so that as we determine a statewide presence, we have some direction and support that can go across the rest of the state. So let's take a closer look at one of our hub areas that is probably a little bit farther along in their work, and that includes the counties of Iron, Madison, St. Francis, and St. Genevieve counties. The Farmington Parents as Teachers program is serving as the hub administrator, and they are in the beginning stages of building on the work around community outreach and resource mapping to gather a broad understanding of the community and key partners. Through this work, the hub will develop a regional hub partnership team, which will be in the position to move the work of the initiative forward, to connect families in a more effective manner, to the resources needed and to align their efforts to create efficiencies. And really thinking about, as Emily had talked about earlier, the goal of our hub is to think about how we can do the work that we do in a more effective manner and provide some efficiencies so that we have funding streams that may be redirected to direct services for families. And so that's our goal. At this time, I'll turn it over to Pam to talk about the logistics of the regional hubs and possible next steps.
Okay, thanks, Lana and Emily, for sharing that great information. Just want to take a closer look at the importance of community relationships that Lana was just talking about. We wanted to share some questions to consider when thinking about getting ready for a regional hub model. So first, think about what early childhood services and family resources already exist in your preliminary hub area. Do you know all of the partners in these programs? Do you have a good understanding of the different services and resources to identify any gaps and overlaps? And how strong are those relationships amongst partners? That's one of the first key things you want to think about. Then, how are children doing in terms of school readiness and school success? What are the key achievement gaps or concerns that need to be addressed? And how connected are the early childhood and elementary schools in your community? What are the connections that need to be made, or can they be strengthened? Also, what kind of learning and development supports do children experience before starting school? So what is the participation in early childhood programs in your community? What is really needed for children to be ready for school in your area? And then finally, what is the level of family engagement and involvement in schools and other programs and activities in the community? Really looking at what does the home to school connection look like? So these are just a few questions to consider. Remember, the key is relationships are at the heart of a successful hub, and how you engage with your partners informally and formally, finding out what's working, what's not working, and what's important to them in a hub model. So these are some examples of the activities involved in the hub readiness event that we've shared with you here today. Some of you might be thinking ahead to after those partnerships and relationships are in place and you have identified the programs and some of the school, home to school connections. And so what's next? Here are some things to consider when formalizing the activities to be part of that regional hub model. So before I go over these, I did want to share, we'll be posting to the website shortly a brief checklist of these items, so it's in a more convenient place for you to review and utilize. But in the meantime, thinking about some of those steps that come next. So first and foremost, identify a hub readiness team in your preliminary hub area. The team should include representation from programs across all the state partners, which was shared on a slide here earlier today. Also, the team must include a school district partner, since the big goal for this work is school readiness and improving the transition between the early care and education system and elementary schools. Then this team will develop a plan to share hub information and conduct some readiness activities with programs to get to an assessment of the buy-in for the regional hub model in that preliminary area. I did want to make note that the preschool development grant does provide the opportunity for local funding to school districts to support increased readiness activities in those preliminary hub areas, such as additional community outreach and partnership building activities that Lana described, mapping community resources and activities to help align those programs after you've identified the partners. Keep in mind, this work is more than just networking and communicating with one another. It involves closely working together to reduce duplication and overlaps and finding ways to increase parent education and support to families with young children. So like Emily mentioned, all of you that are participating in our webinar today, you're already leaders in your community, and you might be thinking you're doing a lot of these activities. And so we are really looking at more of that coordination and alignment activity beyond the networking and the communicating. And then finally, I just want to say a few words about sustainability. Our success with this project really requires all state agencies who fund services to young children to also align what already exists. So not creating something new that requires more money, because we know a grant is not a sustainable funding source. We know a system cannot be sustained by these grant funds alone. So really thinking of the grant funding as transition funds to help us transition from being a fragmented system to more of a unified system. So to do that, we have to streamline our administrative processes like Emily talked about, repurposing personnel and resources in a way that provides for more efficient operations. And then that's what's going to naturally free up funds across the agencies to expand our direct services, to be able to reach more families and provide services to more children. And in doing that, we can prepare every child for kindergarten. So on a personal note, I just want to say thanks again to each of you for your continued interest in this work and your commitment to young children and families. And we just can't say enough. We invited you today because we recognize you are already doing a lot of these activities and you are leaders in your community. So we want to support you, and we also want to hear from you as we think about how this regional hub model might look across the state. So we really do appreciate what you do every day to support the youngest citizens across the state of Missouri. So thank you for that. And in saying that, this concludes our webinar today.